How's it going, YouTube? I hope everything for you is going well. And I want to talk a little bit this lovely Iowa night about the trucking protests in Canada and how successful they have been. They've been so successful, actually, that when Prime Minister Trudeau announced yesterday that he was invoking the Emergency Powers Act, or the Emergency Act that would enable him to act more unilaterally for the first time in Canada's history. I found it very interesting that the premiers, which would be the equivalent of a governor of a U.S. state, as far as I understand Canadian politics, which I do not, so I do apologize if I screw anything up, but the premiers of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and there's one more. I should know this. I was talking to another fellow about it yesterday. But anyway, four Canadian provinces were like, yeah, no, we're not feeling this. Let's see here. Right, okay, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and Manitoba. Those premiers essentially said, we do not support this, and we want to be excluded from the implementation of it, which to me suggests that, number one, these four provinces, in a manner of speaking, they see the writing on the wall. They understand that the people for whom they are responsible and to whom they are responsible, they're not on board with these notions. They probably mostly side with the truckers about removing or reducing mandates and restrictions. And as a result, those four premiers have decided to, in my opinion, make the smart choice and distance themselves from Trudeau's decision, at least in so far as they can, in terms of their power and ability to do so. Again, I'm not up on Canadian politics. I'm just reporting and talking about what I have seen and heard. So, to me, that suggests that the protests have been successful. Even though I've heard that the Coutts, Alberta border crossing between Alberta and Montana has reopened, it does seem to follow some news. I believe I heard, I haven't checked this up, I mean, my computer's right here, I'm not looking it up, so I'm just gonna, off the top of my head, follows that Alberta made some moves to reduce some restrictions on their own, and it seems like there's a general sentiment in Canada that it's time to make a lot of this go away. So anyway, that's what's happening in Canada, and again, to anyone in Canada who might see this, all of your brethren and sistren here in the U.S. are proud of you. You guys have done an amazing job. You set the standard for how any future trucking protest will be conducted. Which brings me to the question of, is an American trucking protest even necessary? Now, there's at least one group called the People's Convoy that is gearing up to meet in Coachella, California, to start their protest and then potentially work their way east to Washington, D.C. But as far as information on that is beyond where they go from Coachella, I have no idea. All I know is that March 4th and 5th, they will be rallying there, and then there will be announcements after that point about what happens then. So, but is America late to the party in this respect? Is an American trucking protest necessary? Is it too late for, American truckers to really make an impact with a similar scale protest to what Canada has done? And my answer to that, in my opinion, is a combination of no, we are too late, our message is going to be diluted and not heard the way it needs to be, but also yes, in the fact that no matter what, any protest executed successfully will garner governmental attention at the local, state, and federal levels, regardless of its size and scale. So it is still a very valid exercise to undertake. So, I still support a trucking protest that speaks out against vaccine mandates for the U.S. military, that speaks out against masking mandates for schools, that speaks out against governors and any federal authorities seeking to retain any emergency powers that were enacted during the height of the pandemic's beginning in 2020, because I believe that since case counts have been documented as on the decline, and that hospitalizations are decreasing, and bug-related fatalities are decreasing, that the virus has reached an endemic state. It is becoming like the flu, where it's just going to be a seasonal cycle or whatever. It's just going to be one of those things hanging around. But as far as its potency and its danger factors, those have been reduced by the successive generations of the virus becoming less severe, less dangerous, but also because vaccination numbers have moved to the point where it's going to have a harder time taking root in an unvaccinated population to become truly dangerous again. And also because of my understanding of viruses is that with each generation they lose potency, and we're in Omicron. There's talk of Sigma, whatever, who cares at this point. It's endemic, and the likelihood of it returning to its 2020 levels of potency, or even its 2021 flare-up levels, is remote at this point, at least as far as I know and understand. And I don't understand much. I'm just going off of what I'm inferring, as well as what I've been reading. So, on the one hand, yes, I believe the American trucking protest is late to the game. In some ways, we should have been first. However, in a lot of ways, it really was good that we were not, because American truck drivers, because of the kind of people in the U.S. who are truckers, because of the kind of people in the U.S. who have certain mindsets or opinions or attitudes, I do not believe an American trucking protest, if it had been the originator of this style of protest, closing border crossings, occupying city streets in this fashion like we've seen in Canada with such success, I don't think it would have been nearly as successful, because someone would have set the whole thing off, or a lot of bad attitude folks would have been at the core of it, and it would have been a whole mess. And instead of actually communicating very succinctly and very clearly the stated desires and executing a protest in a fashion that remained within the boundaries of the First Amendment, meaning rights of the people to peaceably assemble to petition Congress for redress of grievances, peaceably assembling being the two key words there. I don't think we could have done it nearly as well as Canada did. Canada set the stage, Canada set the standard, Canada executed brilliantly, and now we're following Canada's model because of just how spectacularly successful they have been. I mean, they have achieved more in terms of the last 2-3 weeks of their protesting than I think any American protests have achieved on this topic since the pandemic started. So, I mean, it's good that America is late to the game, but it also begs the question of, is it still necessary? Because Illinois is lifting its indoor mask requirement on February 28th on a statewide level, but that still leaves businesses the opportunity to still say, we are going to require masking. So, at the government level, it is rolling back. At the personal and private level, that may still take a little bit of time to really roll it back, but, we're getting to the point where we're basically done with the whole thing, which is really good. So now, the new normal is settling in, which is fantastic news. But there is still room to protest. There is still a message that needs to be communicated to those in power. There is still a statement that needs to be made that the actions of different levels of government during the pandemic have in some cases been egregious. They have been done without proper consent of the public, They have been done at public expense rather than for public benefit in some cases, depending on who you talk to and how you interpret the information, the data, and the history of this pandemic. So there is definitely still a message that needs to be sent to those in power that, remember, you may be the ones in power right now, but you still work for us, and we still have the ability to make sure you leave power. You know, we have an election coming up in the U.S. here in 9 months. Well, less than 9 months now, and it's going to be an absolute crap fest leading up to that, because this is going to be one of the most contentious midterms. Well, let's be honest here. The midterms in 2018 were very contentious. These midterms are going to be very contentious because of the nature of how the Trump administration was and how the Biden administration is. People cannot wait to vote, and there's going to be some pretty nasty things said and done by a lot of folks leading up to it. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling here. I need to try to get focused. Yes, anyway, so trucking protests, still a place for it, but the Canadian model set the standard, set the stage, set the format for how it should be dealt with, how it should be done. If we had done it here in the States, I think it would have been just awful. People might have been walking around with AR-15s and, you know, made it a whole big mess, and there might have been SWAT called out to start, you know, assaulting truckers, who knows. Whereas in Canada, you know, they set up shop around the Ottawa City Centre or their Parliament building, and they had bouncy houses and, you know, little fire pits making s'mores, basically. Bad form for SWAT teams to be assaulting a bouncy house or, you know, a bunch of folks making s'mores. So, you know, Canada did it. They killed it. They knocked it out of the park. I mean, straight up home run. We're talking a 4-game, you know, Stanley Cup sweep right there. No question about it. They did it. They really did. They set the standard. They made it impossible for the Canadian government to move against them forcefully without looking extraordinarily terrible. And you know, Prime Minister Trudeau continues to make statements and conduct actions that make him just look awful. The position he's been trying to hold on to has made him look weak and impotent. The statements he has made have made him look childish and foolish, whereas by comparison, the implacability, the peaceful implacability of a vast majority of the truckers participating in the Canadian protest in Ottawa has just, you know, they got their message across, and the fact that they haven't given up yet, I believe, means that they're going to achieve their victory, because the Canadian government, I think, only has another week or two where it can, before it has to either violently move against the remaining truck drivers in Ottawa, or just cave in and meet with them and come to an agreement where this whole thing can then draw to a peaceful close and everyone walks away as much a winner as they possibly can. However, I was reading this morning, actually, about some, you know, before I got rolling, about some drivers who were leaving the protest because, you know, they were either in a rotation with other drivers to occupy a certain spot or series of spots, as well as another driver who was leaving because he could no longer afford to sustain participating in the protest. He had to look at his financial future and really make a hard choice about you know, what was best for him and his business, his family, and his needs. And so he decided to leave the protest. And then I heard in the same article another driver who was driving for a company. I believe he was an owner-operator, because the article specified his contract was terminated. I don't know if that means that his company driver contract was terminated or his owner-operator lease agreement was terminated. It didn't specify, but I'm going to assume, you know, because most companies in the U.S. don't do contracts anymore. It's all at-will employment options as opposed to driving contracts. I don't know if Canada still does driving contracts. I could look it up right here. I'm not going to, because I'm lazy. I'm just going to infer. His company terminated his employment because he was participating in this protest and they were not happy with it. So that is what I've talked about in previous videos, that If you do want to participate in the trucking protest in the U.S. or a trucking protest in sympathy or in conjunction with the People's Convoy or other protest groups, if your name is not on the side of the truck, you are in danger of having your employment terminated or your contract terminated, or other legal action possibly taken against you because you are exposing your company to a statement that they may not wish to make, or you're making a statement on their behalf without their permission, and that does have ramifications potentially for the company as well as for you personally. My truck does not have my name on its side. It is somebody else's company's name entirely. It is their DOT number. It is their MC number. It is if the registration that I'm operating under, it is their insurance coverage I'm operating with. So I have a responsibility to do right by them, which means that if I was to seek to participate in a protest, and I do seek to participate, if there's going to be a stop in Chicago, I'm going to try to be there, not with my truck, because again, my company has not come out and said we support a protest. They have also not come out and said we do not support a protest. So my interpretation of that is it is not my place to speak for them. So therefore, I will not seek to speak for them. I will not seek to expose their equipment, meaning their trailers, or their name on the side of my truck to possible, blowback from any people who may seek to do harm to them on the back end, however they possibly can, just because they see my truck associated with a protest. They take down my number, my VIN number, whatever, and then report it, and try to falsify some records saying that I was doing something stupid when I really wasn't. But still, it is better for me to seek to put my person in the protest line rather than my equipment in the protest line, because my equipment, though it is mine, has someone else's name on it. So I need to protect their reputation and my agreement with them, my operating agreement, and not expose myself to termination by putting their equipment and their name in a negative situation. Because again, in the States, there are a lot of truckers who act a certain way, think a certain way, behave a certain way, and in a lot of ways that is not conducive to a polite discourse. In other words, we got a lot of hotheads in the U.S., a lot of folks who think they are absolutely correct when they are not, a lot of folks who believe that what they're doing, because they've been doing it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, they're doing it 100% right 100% of the time, and if you're not agreeing with them, then you're stupid. There are some of those drivers, I'm sure, in Canada as well, but I think we got a lot more of them here in the States. So those folks are going to potentially be a problem. They could also become people to rally around. It's going to vary, I think, depending on the situation. So it's going to be, I think, interesting to see how these protests are executed, as well as just what the participation levels actually end up being, because again, the mandates are on the decline, the restrictions are on the decline, and yeah, we have our military to fight for in order to not have a lot of soldiers and sailors and air personnel required to either choose the jab or a discharge if they don't feel the jab is right for them. I believe we need to fight for them. We've got reports coming out, depending on who you talk to and what news you look at, about kids in schools who are having emotional issues because of masking, and so we got to fight for our kids. I've got a buddy of mine, a couple of my friends actually have young children, school-age children or soon-to-be school-age children, and I would like their kids to be able to have a solid, good schoolyard experience, and I don't think masking is in their best interests at that young age to have to worry about adult level problems when they're just kids. So we got to fight for our kids in that respect, but we need to do it intelligently, we need to do it peacefully, we need to do it with resolute strength, and not resorting to mob mentality tactics that I think will then dilute the message and just torpedo the whole process. So there's my ramble on that. Again, Canada, you truckers have knocked it out of the park. You guys did a great job. Keep up the good work. Make sure you make the government talk to you before you give up, before you move out of Ottawa, before you let them, declare victory when you end your protest occupation. And for us in the States, we have to be careful that when we execute our protests, that we do so intelligently, that we do so peacefully, that we do so in a fashion that lines up with the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, as well as remains within the boundaries of the law, as insofar as we're still enabling things to happen, like emergency vehicles to get past our equipment and so forth, or our protest lines, that we're not giving the government opportunities to then malign us or move against us in a fashion that dilutes what we're trying to achieve here. So that's all I'll say about that for this evening. If you made it all the way through my diatribe, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you